The fall of Rome. 5 fatal mistakes that destroyed an empire. Think of Rome at its height: roads, law, legions, and empires stretching from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. It seemed permanent. Yet centuries later, what was once the world's heartbeat lay in ruins. Rome did not fall because of a single battle. It collapsed from many small failures that stacked until the system crashed. In this video, we'll explain 5 fatal mistakes that, together with external pressure, ended the ancient Roman world and why those mistakes still matter to every large institution today. First, the short version. Historians point to many causes: internal decay, economic stress, military trouble, and invasions. Over the next 10 minutes, we'll move through 5 core errors: chronic political instability, economic fragmentation and inflation, military overreach and unreliable troops, administrative overload and corruption, and finally cultural transformation that eroded civic cohesion. For each one, I'll show how it worked, give concrete examples, and end with the single insight that ties them together. Mistake 1: high political instability and civil strife. Rome's government was never simple. At its fall, succession was a problem, and the process of replacing emperors often produced violence. During the 3rd century, the empire experienced the so-called crisis of the 3rd century, a rapid succession of rulers, many of whom seized power by force and were quickly assassinated. When power passes by the sword instead of by law, the result is short-term thinking. Generals who became emperors cared about securing coffers and troops now, not building institutions for the next generation. Every assassination or palace could drain resources, scared away talent, and trained elites to seek private advantage over public service. In short, when the top of the state becomes a revolving door, the state itself destabilizes. Mistake 2: economic strain, taxation, and inflation. Rome's economy depended heavily on conquest and tribute. Land was concentrated in large estates, and agriculture suffered when free peasant owners disappeared. To fund their armies and courts, emperors taxed hard. Hard times led to debased currency coins with less precious metal, which created inflation. Officials attempted short-term fixes like raising taxes or minting more coins. But these only accelerated decline. Merchants and farmers began to evade taxes. Provinces grew resentful, and local economies fragmented. When ordinary people lose confidence in money and markets, commerce slows, grain supplies falter, and the state's ability to feed its cities weakens. Rome's economic engine simply lost efficiency. Mistake 3: military overextension and reliance on foederati. An empire as large as Rome requires a costly military to hold its borders. But as manpower thinned, the Romans increasingly relied on foederati, barbarian allies, and mercenaries settled along the frontiers to serve as troops. At first that seemed practical. These federated groups provided local defense at lower cost. Over time, dependence on non-Roman troops changed the army's composition and loyalties. Rather than a unified Roman legions loyal to the Senate or emperor, Rome fielded forces whose primary loyalty was to their own chieftains. The discipline and integration that once underpinned Roman military success eroded. This made coherent, coordinated defense against mass migrations and invasions far harder to mount. Mistake 4: administrative complexity and corruption. As Rome grew, so did its bureaucracy. The empire split into eastern and western administrations, with dozens of provinces, governors, tax collectors, and officials. Complexity breeds delay, delays breed corruption. Provincial governors took opportunities for profit and carried local resentments into the capital. Meanwhile, court factions promoted officials who served their patrons, not the public. Administrative cost rose while efficiency dropped. The very system designed to administer Rome's vast lands became a drag on resources, slowing military logistics and starving provincial defense for lack of timely funds. Mistake 5: cultural transformation and the erosion of civic virtue. This is the most controversial, but it matters. Rome's identity changed over time. Where Romans once tied citizenship to civic duties and local community institutions, later centuries saw shifting loyalties, religious movements, local elites, and private power networks that competed with imperial authority. The rise of new religions and cultural shifts reshaped how people thought about allegiance and duty. That change did not cause the fall by itself, but it weakened the social glue that had helped Rome absorb shocks. Institutions survive when citizens believe in them. Once belief fractures, institutions become brittle. The external pressures, migration, and the Huns alongside these internal failures, waves of peoples moved into Roman borders. The Hunnic migrations pushed Germanic tribes westward, Visigoths and Vandals crossed into Roman lands. Rome faced not a single huge army but decades of pressure. Faced with internal weakness, the empire struggled to repel these movements. In 410, the sack of Rome by the Visigothic leader Alaric shocked the world. In 476, the deposition of Romulus Augustulus is conventionally marked as the fall of the Western Empire. But those events were symptoms of a system that had been sick for generations. How these mistakes interacted. The point is not that one mistake was fatal alone. It was their interaction. Political instability prompted higher taxes. Higher taxes and inflation undermined the economy. A weakened economy made it harder to fund a reliable army, which in turn forced reliance on foederati. Corruption slowed responses to crises, and changing social identities reduced popular support for expensive state projects. Each failure amplified the next. That is a lesson for any large organization. Systemic fragility grows when fixes are short-term and political incentives reward survival over reform. Key evidence and debates. Scholars still debate the relative weight of each cause. Some emphasize external invasions, others internal decay. Modern historians tend to prefer synthesis. Structural weaknesses combined with external shocks led to collapse. The more important lesson is methodological. Look for feedback loops in historical change. When a system has many reinforcing failures, collapse becomes far more likely. Takeaway and contemporary lessons. Why does this matter today? Because large institutions, corporations, states, even online platforms face the same trade-offs: short-term thinking, economic misalignment, overextension, administrative bloat, and loss of legitimacy are universal risks. The Roman example is an ancient case study in institutional fragility. Preventing collapse requires reform, investment in resilience, and an honest look at the perverse incentives that reward survival over sustainability. If you found this breakdown useful, subscribe to Hidden Histories. Next week we'll examine a single moment that accelerated Rome's decline, the crisis of the 3rd century. When the empire nearly shattered in a generation, history repeats itself not in exact detail, but in the logic of systems. Learn the logic, and you see the past with new eyes.